UFP, the United Federation of Podcasts.
Welcome to Franchise Fatigue, the little podcast on the United Federation of Podcast Network, where your hosts take a look at movies, remakes, and sequels. I'm your host, Brandon-Shea Mutella, and joining me today is the man, my nemesis, the man who's trying to get the same bounty as me, but you know what? Let's work together instead. Zach Moore.
So, Brandon, I'm very excited to talk about A Fistful of Dollars 2, The Mandalorian, today.
The Mandalorian. Yeah, they're bounty hunters. It works for me. Bubba Joe.
All right, let's move on and introduce our guest, Mr. Tom Elliot. He's been with us every film so far in this franchise from the Twilight Zone podcast. You know him, you love him. What's up, Tom? Thanks for joining us.
Gentlemen, it's been a while. It's good to speak to you again. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Right on. I love it. Yes, we are looking forward to discussing this one here, the next movie in the Man with No Name trilogy, I guess. But, Zach, we've got some interesting trivia on this film, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, he has a second name already. So Man with No Name, again, is a very bad description. I don't know who came up with this moniker for this trilogy. We can end that. Monco is his name. So if you really want to, use some headcanon, you can say his name is Joe Monco, if you really like. Because, the thing about...
I completely missed that. I missed Joe in the first one, as we were talking last episode.
Do you even watch these movies, Brandon, that we talk about? Yeah. So if you think back to Yojimbo and Sanjuro, there's actually, there's a scene, there's a line where hey, what's your name anyway? He's like, my name is... And he looks around and he comes up with a name. There's none of that here. People just drop names for Man with No Name. It'd be one thing if he's inventing the names of people. But we get into it because that's actually part of the trivia of why he has multiple names. So if you want, we can just dive head first into this stuff.
Let's do it.
All right, let's do it. So in classic Fistful of Dollars fashion, this was delayed a couple years. It was filmed in 1965, but not released in the U.S. until 1967. So we had that going for it. And interesting, like Kurosawa with Yojimbo Sanjuro, Sergio Leone, he didn't want to make a follow-up to Fistful of Dollars. He felt the franchise was fatigued, much like Brandon-Shea Mutella. So... but it was such a huge hit that the production company, Jolly Film, refused to pay Leone what was owed to him from the first movie unless he did a second movie. So they kind of held him hostage there, and that's why we got a follow-up. And, and this is a common theme for Leone here with breaking the rules of 1960s Hollywood and the conventions, because he just didn't know any better. And talking about traditionally, in Hollywood films, when you have a shootout, you'd see the person with the gun shoot, and you cut to the person getting shot, and you cut back. But in these films, he's actually following Clint Eastwood with the camera, seeing the people get shot and blown away, as if you're kind of over Eastwood's shoulder. So that's its own kind of approach. But then also, horses being gunned down. That was something you didn't see in a lot of westerns. Animal cruelty.
Yeah, I remember that from the last movie there when the guy had the machine gun going off and all those people were falling, but he kept missing the horses. That's a pretty epic aim that he had in the last movie. Well, he was able to miss the horses.
And then notice there's no blood in that either because it's just people. I mean, obviously it's all right, go, and the people are just jumping off horses, acting like they're falling. There's no squibs or anything. It's low budget, but I appreciate the lack of gore and blood, at least in a film like this. But also, marijuana use and a rape scene, which there is in this film as well, so we can get into that. But these are things you would never, ever, ever see in an American film in the 1960s. So, now the Man with No Name, as we said, his name is Monco in this film, and his name was Joe in A Fistful of Dollars. Now, this is why it's like this. So, the finding of an Italian court that settled the lawsuit brought by Jolly Films, which is a producer of Fistful of Dollars. After release of the movie, Sergio Leone had a falling out with them, because they wouldn't pay him, and they made this movie with a different producer, Alberto Grimaldi. So Jolly Films sued, and they claimed ownership of the, quote, Joe character, but lost when the court decided that the Western's gunfighter persona, which is characterized by the costume and the mannerisms, belonged in the public domain's folklore. And you can't, like, copyright, like, a cowboy archetype, which is basically what they were trying to do. So Clint Eastwood, wearing the same thing, which also ties it together. His poncho, it was never washed during the production of the first film, or even any of these films, actually. But it was mended. In the final scene, obviously the last film, his poncho gets pierced by all the bullets from one of the Ramon brothers. And in this movie, he's wearing the same poncho back to front, and the mending of the bullet holes are clearly visible on the back in several scenes. And in the original area, it was over his the left part of his chest, but now it's over his right shoulder blade. So he just turned it around, which is, if I was a cowboy and I got shot a lot, I would just flip it around and it'd look normal. So I think that's a very efficient thing to do. And that, that green poncho is like his look. So that is character continuity. But, I mean, it's called the Man with No Name trilogy just because there was a lawsuit after the first film. They wanted to keep using the character. I mean, that's basically what it is. So sorry to ruin the mystery of the character, guys. That's why. So, now, speaking of characters, we have Lee Van Cleef in this film. He's kind of the co-lead, really. And, Eastwood calls him old man, and Lee Van Cleef calls him, boy. But there were only a 5-year age difference between the guys. So, it's one of those classic Indiana Jones, Sean Connery's 12 years older than Harrison Ford, but he's his dad thing going on with these two guys. Now, so Sergio Leone, once again, he wanted Henry Fonda to be in this film. He'd wanted him to be in the first film. He wanted to be in this one. He wanted him to play the role of Douglas Mortimer, which was Lee Van Cleef's character, but Fonda turned it down. Charles Bronson was approached again, not interested. So he's got better things to do, apparently. Lee Marvin was approached, but he turned it down because he had just signed on to make another film, Cat Ballou. And then Leone offered it to Lee Van Cleef, who hadn't worked in the movies in a few years since How the West Was Won. Although he worked pretty steadily in television. Yeah, appeared in an episode of The Twilight Zone. Isn't that right, Tom?
That's right. So Western, too.
Western, that's right. With Lee Marvin, so there's a lot of crossover between all these guys going on. But Van Cleef, he kind of fallen into some alcoholism and had some, but hurt his career. So this really did help, and he was very grateful he got this part because he'd fallen into hard times in his career-wise. And this effectively marked a resurgence in his career. But in the meantime, he'd actually taken up painting in the interim as a way to make money when he wasn't getting acting roles, which, all creative types, you get all kinds of creative outlets there. One other actor who was considered for Mortimer, and I would have loved this, was Jack Palance. You might know him from City Slickers or Batman '89, but he was Shane. Okay, I mean, talking about westerns, right? Isn't that? But he would have been a great presence as well. I love Jack Palance, big Jack Palance fan. So Lee Van Cleef claimed that he was a faster draw of the gun than Clint Eastwood. It took him 3 frames of film, which equates to 1/8 of a second to draw, cock, and fire. So I don't know if they actually got, I don't know if they had a contest or what, but Lee Van Cleef thought he was better than Clint Eastwood. Now, talk about, we can talk about this. There are lots of recurring actors in this franchise. And Gian Maria Volante, he was the main villain in the first film. He's also the main villain in this film. So that's something else that Jimbo and Sanjuro have in common with the Man with No Name trilogy. Like, let's just have all the same actors play very similar characters in both movies, right? So yeah, because one of the side villains in the first film becomes the main villain in the second film, et cetera, vice versa. But in the first A Fistful of Dollars, Gian Maria Volante, he did perform his own voice for the English translator. However, he did need he performed his own voice for the English language version, but he did need a translator to tell him everything word for word. So he did not know any English. So,
wow.
I wonder if Italy had the same kind of thing, because this boils down to, the Japanese films were done by a studio, and movie making back in this day, even in the States, were done by studio production. They would hire a person, they would get a salary for a year, and they would just make as many movies as they were scheduled to. Like nowadays, actors are contract based. You get paid this much money to do this movie, and then you're out of work until you get your next film. And in this day and age, people would just be hired on for a studio, and they'd be like, okay, today you're working on this film, tomorrow you're working on that film, and we mentioned it briefly at the end of the last one. I'm going through the Godzilla movies right now, and some of the bonus features for the Godzilla set they're talking about on Toho Studios, and one of the guys is like, yep, I was on this one this day and this one this day, working with all these different people, and it was a different type of production. And I wonder if Italy might have had that same thing, where it's like, we got a set of actors that just work on our movies, and we need you on this set this day, kind of thing.
Well, the studio system, it was even in Hollywood in that day and age,
Yep.
Which, until I think the 70s is when things really, the new wave of Hollywood cinema in the 70s kind of shook things up. But yeah, I mean, you just have people on retainer, like, all right, you're going to get this, that. And that's why you see all these familiar faces over and over again. And people, again, this is the 60s. People aren't thinking, like, 50 years later, some guy's going to sit around podcasting about why is this the same guy playing this character? He died in the last film. So, but here we are, right? So,
yeah.
But speaking of Volante, it's funny, Sergio Leone, he kind of had the Nicholas Meyer to William Shatner approach in Star Trek II here with Volante as the villain, because Leone felt that he was sometimes too theatrical as Indio, his character in this film. And so what Leone would do is he would do take after take after take to try to kind of wear him out. And then Volante became so angry with this, because he kind of caught on to what was going on at some point, he eventually stormed off the set. But, they're filming in the middle of the desert, and he really couldn't get a ride anywhere, so he came back, but he swore he would never make another Western, because he was sick of this this kind of treatment. Which I think, it's like they're going to catch on at some point. But yeah, as the story goes, Nicholas Meyer did the same thing to William Shatner in Star Trek II, the one scene everybody talks
Here
about.
It comes.
Yeah, it's like when Khan's like supposed to get the prefix code for the Reliant, Shatner kept going like, here it comes, here it comes, here it comes, here it comes.
Here it
like
comes.
The 20th take or something, he was just like, here it comes. And it's like you don't want to telegraph to the villain. So it's interesting to hear that about the guy here, because I think, and perhaps because of Leone's direction, I think Volante does a better job in this film than he did in the first film's character as the main villain. So. Mm-hmm. Now, talking about recurring actors, Mario Brega, he appeared in all three movies in the Dollar trilogy. In the first film, he was Chico. He got killed by the giant barrel. In this film, he's Nino, and he gets stabbed in the back by a fellow member of Indigo's gang. He's kind of like the Paul Roach of the Indiana Jones movies. He's like the guy that gets killed in brutal ways in each film. He gets killed by the propeller in Raiders of the Lost Ark, and he gets crushed by the conveyor belt of the rocks in the second one, and he was actually supposed to be in Last Crusade, but they cut a scene. But anyway, that reminded me of that guy dying in these horrific ways in each film. And Ennio Morricone, again, he wrote the score before production started, and that's what Sergio Leone actually had asked him to do. And Leone would often shoot to the music on set, which is a very unique approach. But again, they didn't record any audio, so you can get away with that. You think about movies, and you're like, whenever there's like a dance scene, we did the Terminator a couple franchises ago. Whenever there's like a dance scene in there, right? When Terminator comes to kill Sarah Connor, when they film that, there's no music. People are just moving around. Like, that's the most surreal thing to experience, to see a movie set where they're like, all this music and sound effects is going on, but there's no actual music going on there. But you can get away with stuff like that by like, here, this is going to be the score, guys. We're going to play it as we film it. So I think that's just a very interesting, unique approach. Now, again, Clint Eastwood did do his ADR, and Lee Van Cleef did so as well. So both of them, the main stars of the film, did their audio, as did Gian Maria Volante. So the main characters there did, and as we were talking about in our Fistful of Dollars podcast, when you don't know what the other people's voices really are, it's not that distracting. So, I think it doesn't really take away from anything. It does add to a bit of charm there. And then also when they did...
following up on the last movie, that kid sure did not sound quite right in the last movie.
The kid was kind of weak, I'm not going to lie. Yeah, the mama, mama, that was a little rough. That was like some, Rocky Bullwinkle kind of dialogue going on there. But
Bewitching Pool.
Yes, exactly. To bring it on to the Twilight Zone, the voice of Rocky the Bullwinkle. Rocky the Flying Squirrel. So there is one last bit of trivia to discuss, and it's about several scenes that were shot, but no one really knows if they were shown in any version of the movie. When you have these international movies, no one's really sure, like, okay, what market got this or that, or what was shown where. And some of the scenes include Clint Eastwood, Monco, as he's named in this film. He was looking at the reward poster for Red Kavanaugh, and later taking the poster